Imagine you did everything right. You learned their language. You adopted their legal system. You built farms, schools, churches, and newspapers. You fought alongside their army. You signed their treaties. You took their names. You played by every single rule they gave you. And then they took everything anyway. This is not a story about a clash between civilization and savagery, because by every definition the United States itself used, the Cherokee Nation was civilized, more than civilized. They were, by 1820, one of the most sophisticated, literate, and legally organized societies on the North American continent. They had a written language invented from scratch in 12 years by a single man. They had a constitution modeled on the United States. They had a Supreme Court, a bicameral legislature, a free press, plantations, schools, churches. They had everything America said it wanted from them. So America destroyed them anyway. Between 1838 and 1839, the United States Army forcibly removed the entire Cherokee Nation from their ancestral homeland in Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama. Over 16,000 people marched at gunpoint, through winter, through disease, through starvation. The Cherokee called it Nunadal Chuni.
We call it the Trail of Tears. This is the full story of what America did to the nation it called its most civilized ally, and why it did it anyway. Before we talk about what was destroyed, we must talk about what was built. The Cherokee, Tsalagi in their own language, were among the oldest continuous inhabitants of the southeastern United States. Their homeland stretched across what is now 8 states: Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Kentucky, Virginia, and West Virginia. For thousands of years, they built a sophisticated society in the shadow of the Great Smoky Mountains. Towns connected by trade networks stretching hundreds of miles. Governance systems balancing war chiefs and peace chiefs, agricultural practices that sustained large populations, ceremonies tied to seasons, to gratitude, to the sacred relationship between people and land. They called their homeland Shekinah, Shekinah, land of the blue smoke, for the mists that rose from the ancient mountains every morning. It was home. It had always been home. Shift, European contact. When European explorers arrived in the 1500s, the Cherokee numbered somewhere between 25,000 and 50,000 people. They traded with the Spanish, then the English. They adapted, as they had always adapted. But the diseases that came with Europeans cut through their population like a scythe. By the 1700s, smallpox epidemics had killed perhaps half their people. Yet they survived, they adapted, they endured.
What they had not survived yet was a government that wanted their land and had the military power to take it. That was coming, and it would come wrapped in the language of civilization, progress, and law. After the American Revolution, the United States had a problem. Its stated values, liberty, civilization, Christian morality, the rule of law, were in direct contradiction with its treatment of native peoples. You cannot claim to be building a civilization based on justice while simultaneously stealing land from its inhabitants through violence. Some Americans, at least, recognized this tension. President George Washington and his Secretary of War, Knox, proposed what they called a civilization policy. The idea, if native peoples could be persuaded to adopt European American customs, farming, Christianity, literacy, private property, then perhaps they could be assimilated. Coexistence would be possible. The Cherokee heard this policy, considered it, and decided to try it. What followed over the next 40 years was one of the most remarkable transformations in human history. In 1821, a man named Sequoyah completed something no individual in recorded history had done alone before or since. He invented a writing system for a previously unwritten language from scratch by himself in 12 years. The Cherokee syllabary, 86 characters, each representing a syllable, was so elegantly designed, so perfectly suited to the Cherokee language, that within months of its introduction, tens of thousands of Cherokee people had taught themselves to read and write. Within a year, the literacy rate in the Cherokee Nation was higher than among their white neighbors in Georgia. Think about that. By 1828, the Cherokee Phoenix, Tsalagi Tsulahisanvi, was publishing the first Native American newspaper printed in both English and Cherokee. Editor Elias Boudinot distributed it across the nation and beyond. By 1827, the Cherokee Nation ratified a constitution modeled explicitly on the United States Constitution, establishing a principal chief, a bicameral legislature, and a judicial system including a Supreme Court. They had farms, plantations, mills, schools, churches, roads, a postal service. Some Cherokee families, it must be acknowledged honestly, even held enslaved African Americans, adopting one of the most brutal institutions of American society as part of their adaptation. This is part of the full history. The point is undeniable. By every standard the United States had established for what a civilized society looked like, the Cherokee had met it. And it didn't matter. Because it was never really about civilization. It was always about the land. Georgia wanted Cherokee land. That is the simple truth at the center of this entire story. After the American Revolution, Georgia had ceded its western land claims to the federal government on the condition that the U.S. would eventually extinguish native land titles within Georgia's borders and open that land to white settlement. By the 1820s, Georgia was losing patience. Cotton was king, land was money, and the Cherokee Nation occupied some of the most fertile, valuable territory in the entire American South. Building pressure. Georgia began passing increasingly aggressive laws, declaring that Cherokee laws had no force within Georgia's borders, that Cherokee people could not testify in court against white men, that Cherokee land could be seized. The Cherokee took Georgia to the United States Supreme Court, and they won.
In Worcester v. Georgia, 1832, Chief Justice John Marshall ruled that the Cherokee Nation was a distinct political community with sovereign rights, that Georgia's laws had no force in Cherokee territory, that the federal government, not Georgia, held authority over relations with the Cherokee. It was a complete legal victory. The Supreme Court of the United States said the Cherokee are right, Georgia is wrong, the law is on their side. President Andrew Jackson's response? John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it. He refused to uphold the ruling of his own Supreme Court. And then, in 1828, gold was discovered in the North Georgia mountains, Cherokee land, the first major gold rush in American history, years before California. Thousands of prospectors flooded Cherokee territory. The Georgia Gold Lottery parceled out Cherokee land to white Georgian citizens, land the Cherokee still legally owned. The Constitution, the Supreme Court, the treaties, the civilization policy, none of it mattered once there was gold in the ground. To understand the Trail of Tears, you must understand Andrew Jackson, because without Jackson, it may not have happened. Not like this, not this fast, not this completely. Jackson's relationship with Native peoples was long, complicated, and ultimately lethal. He'd fought alongside Cherokee warriors in the Creek Wars. At the Battle of Horseshoe Bend in 1814, Cherokee allies helped him achieve the decisive victory that made him a national hero. He reportedly adopted a Creek infant whose mother had been killed in battle.
He knew Native peoples as human beings, as individuals, as warriors who had bled for him. And he removed them anyway. Jackson believed with genuine conviction that removal was mercy, that Native peoples could not survive surrounded by white settlement, that moving them west of the Mississippi would protect them from the inevitable conflicts that proximity to white Americans would bring. He was not entirely wrong about the conflicts. He was catastrophically wrong about the solution. In 1830, President Jackson signed the Indian Removal Act. It authorized the federal government to negotiate treaties exchanging native lands in the east for territory west of the Mississippi River. The word negotiate is doing enormous work in that sentence, because what followed was not negotiation, it was pressure, bribery, division, manipulation, the targeting of minority Cherokee factions willing to sign removal treaties, and the use of those minority signatures to bind an entire unwilling nation. In 1835, a small group of Cherokee men, perhaps 300 to 500 out of a nation of 16,000, signed the Treaty of New Echota, agreeing to removal. Principal Chief John Ross, representing the vast majority, gathered over 15,000 Cherokee signatures on a protest petition, nearly the entire nation, and presented it to Congress. Congress ratified the treaty anyway, by a single vote. One vote. The fate of 16,000 people. One vote. If Black Kettle represents the tragedy of a peace chief who trusted too much, John Ross represents something different, the tragedy of a leader who fought too smart, too hard, and too long, and still lost. Chance Usti, Little John, his Cherokee name. Son of a Scottish trader and a Cherokee mother of mixed heritage, John Ross looked more European than Cherokee by the standards of his era. He used that strategically in every negotiation with Washington.
But he was Cherokee, absolutely completely Cherokee. Principal chief from 1828 until his death in 1866, nearly 40 years. He led his people through removal, through civil war, through Reconstruction. He never stopped fighting. When Georgia began seizing Cherokee land, Ross went to Washington. When Congress passed the Removal Act, Ross lobbied against it. When the fraudulent Treaty of New Echota was signed, Ross gathered 15,000 signatures and went to Congress. He wrote, he argued, he pleaded, he used the law, he used the press, he used every tool a man operating within a system could use.
And when the army came anyway, when soldiers began rounding up Cherokee families at bayonet point in the summer of 1838, John Ross negotiated with General Winfield Scott to allow the Cherokee to manage their own removal, to minimize the death, to preserve what dignity remained. He walked the Trail of Tears himself. His wife, Quady Ross, gave her only blanket to a sick child during the crossing of the frozen Ohio River. Quady Ross died of pneumonia on that march. John Ross buried his wife in the frozen ground of Arkansas and kept walking, because his people needed him to keep walking. May 1838, General Winfield Scott arrives in Cherokee Territory with 7,000 soldiers and a deadline.
The 2-year window given by the Treaty of New Ecochota has expired. The Cherokee, the vast majority of whom never accepted the treaty, have not moved. Scott issues a proclamation. Removal begins immediately. Cherokee people are to report voluntarily or be collected by force. Almost none report voluntarily. What follows is one of the largest forced relocations in American history. Soldiers fan out across Georgia, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Alabama. They arrive at farms, at churches, at schools, at breakfast tables. Families are given minutes to gather what they can carry, then march to one of 31 stockade forts built specifically for this purpose. Eyewitness accounts from white Georgians, from soldiers, from missionaries describe the same scenes repeatedly. A soldier recalls arriving at a Cherokee farm to find a family at dinner. They were driven out, the table left standing with the meal on it. A Georgia volunteer, years later, wrote, "I fought through the Civil War and have seen men shot to pieces and slaughtered by thousands, but the Cherokee removal was the cruelest work I ever knew." In the stockades, conditions deteriorated rapidly. It was summer, one of the hottest summers on record. Thousands of people crowded into wooden enclosures, no proper sanitation, inadequate food, contaminated water.
Dysentery, whooping cough, measles, fever. They hadn't even begun the march yet, and the dying had already started. Chief Ross pleaded with General Scott to delay the march until autumn, until cooler weather. Scott agreed. The march would begin in the fall. But in the stockades, through that long, hot summer, people were already dying. Historians estimate that perhaps 2,000 Cherokee died in the stockades before the march even began. October 1838. The march begins. 16,000 people. More than 1,000 miles. From the Georgia mountains to Indian Territory in present-day Oklahoma. They walk. Many have no shoes. The Army's promised supplies, wagons, food, blankets, are inadequate from the first day. Contractors hired to provide provisions are corrupt. Food rations are short. Wagons break down. They cross the Tennessee River, the Ohio River, the Mississippi River on flatboats in December in ice. Then through southern Illinois, which had passed laws barring native peoples from passing through the state. They passed through anyway, under military escort, through a population of hostile white settlers who lined the roads to watch. The winter of 1838-39 is one of the coldest in recorded history. Ice storms, frozen roads, temperatures plunging below zero.
The elderly die first, then the very young, then those weakened by months in the stockades. 1 in 4. Narrator. They arrived broken, grieving, depleted. Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma, was not the paradise the government had promised. The land was unfamiliar, the climate different, the resources they'd built over generations. Gone, left behind in Georgia, seized in a land lottery.
And they arrived into conflict. The internal fracture. The small faction that had signed the Treaty of New Echota, led by Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot, had arrived years earlier under far better conditions. The old settler Cherokee, who had moved west voluntarily decades before, had their own government. Now 16,000 exhausted, traumatized survivors arrived into a territory already politically divided. In June 1839, Major Ridge, John Ridge, and Elias Boudinot, the treaty signers, were assassinated. Killed by men who believed they had violated Cherokee law by signing away the nation's land without authorization. The Cherokee Nation teetered on the edge of civil war. John Ross, again. John Ross, having buried his wife on the trail, having held his people together through impossibility, now worked to forge unity in Indian Territory. Slowly, painfully. A new constitution, a new capital at Tahlequah, new schools, new institutions. Building resilience. They built again, because that is what they had always done. Within a decade, the Cherokee Nation in Indian Territory had rebuilt. A capital city, a female seminary, a male seminary, the first institution of higher education west of the Mississippi, a newspaper, a legal code, a functioning representative government. They had survived the unsurvivable, and they had built again. And then, the Civil War came.
The Trail of Tears was not the end of the Cherokee story. It was one chapter in a book of betrayals that continued for another century. The Civil War split the Cherokee Nation, as it split America. Some Cherokee, particularly slaveholders, aligned with the Confederacy. Others, led by John Ross, remained loyal to the Union. Cherokee fought Cherokee on Oklahoma soil. When the Confederacy lost, the United States punished the entire Cherokee Nation, including those who'd remained loyal, by voiding existing treaties and demanding new concessions. The land got smaller again. Allotment, the next assault. In 1887, the Dawes Act imposed a new assault, allotment. Communally held tribal lands would be divided into individual parcels, 160 acres per person. Remaining land, and there was always remaining land, would be open to white settlement. The Cherokee Nation lost millions of acres. Again. Oklahoma statehood. When Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, the federal government effectively dissolved the 5 civilized tribes governments. The Cherokee Nation, which had functioned as a sovereign government for generations, was told it no longer existed as a legal entity. Their courts, their legislature, their institutions. Gone by federal decree. And then there were the boarding schools. From the 1870s through the mid-20th century, Cherokee children, along with children of hundreds of other tribes, were forcibly removed from their families and sent to federal boarding schools. Schools where they were punished for speaking their language, for practicing their religion, for being who they were. Kill the Indian, save the man. That was the explicit stated goal. Those words were not a metaphor, they were policy. The trail did not end in 1839. It kept going, changing shape, finding new forms. But it kept going. The Cherokee Nation today is the largest federally recognized tribe in the United States, over 390,000 citizens.
Read that number again. 390,000 citizens. They were supposed to disappear. Every policy, every removal, every boarding school, every allotment act was designed, explicitly or implicitly, to make them disappear. They did not disappear.
The Cherokee Nation today operates hospitals, schools, businesses, and cultural programs across northeastern Oklahoma. It employs over 12,000 people, one of the largest employers in the state. Its government provides services to citizens across all 50 states. The Cherokee language, Tsalagi, which boarding schools tried to destroy, is alive. Language immersion programs are producing new fluent speakers. Young Cherokee people are learning to read Sequoia's syllabary, the same syllabary invented 2 centuries ago that made their ancestors the most literate native nation on the continent. The United Keetoowah Band of Cherokee Indians, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians in North Carolina, who never left the mountains, who hid in the hills during removal, who fought through the courts to stay on their ancestral land. They are still in those mountains, still in Shakinajay, still in the land of the blue smoke. The fights are not over. Treaty rights, water rights, sacred site protection, the ongoing recovery of children's remains from boarding school graves, the fight for proper consultation under federal law. The trail has changed forms, but the Cherokee Nation is still walking it, eyes forward, feet planted. What happened to the Cherokee was not an accident of history. It was a choice, made by specific men, implemented through specific laws, enforced by specific soldiers. A nation did everything it was asked to do, learned the language, adopted the institutions, played by the rules, and was destroyed anyway, because the rules were never the real reason. Land was the reason, gold was the reason, race was the reason.
Knowing this history, sitting with its full weight, is not about guilt. It is about truth. And truth is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. If this story moved you, if you believe the Cherokee Nation's history deserves to be taught, honored, and fully understood, please share this video, subscribe, pass it on. This was the story of the Cherokee, the nation America called civilized, the nation America destroyed anyway, the nation that survived.